But it's interesting, it makes me think how cinema, which is an industry of illusion basically, and something that you address in the documentary that you just finished, Backstory, which you can go and see at the Ca' Foscari University in the Campo Santa Margarita Auditorium until Saturday. For those of you who didn't know, it's screened every hour from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. as of tomorrow, and tonight it stops at 7. Anyway, in that film, you talk about you make a portrait of this family of people who have been involved with rear projection, which is used very commonly in cinema, which was used very commonly in cinema. And I was thinking about how cinema is really an incredible industry of illusion. So there's something about this architecture, this modernist architecture, where modernity is somewhat very much staged in the same way, do you think? Or I mean, is there a link there that's also interesting to explore, maybe? I mean, the other one is obviously technology, I would say, but...
Well, I hadn't thought of it before until you asked the question, but one of the things about, actually, as you were saying, the classic Hollywood technique of having a film projected of an outside that gives the illusion that the people in the studio are actually in the space. But it's not a very good illusion. I mean, it's always been a bad illusion. And one of the reasons why it's a bad illusion is because of the flatness of the film. Once you refilm film, you have a kind of flat image behind three-dimensional people. Well, still an illusion of those people, but you have a kind of dropping off of its three-dimensionality illusion. So one of the great pleasures of watching rear projection is to actually understand that at some level you actually know that you're watching a movie inside of a movie, and that this is could be considered to be kind of modernist form in itself, the kind of montage of two materials, self-referentiality, negation, all these things that the other arts like, painting and photography had already, by the 1930s had already, incorporated as a kind of sine qua non, as a kind of basic ontology of avant-garde art was to destroy the illusion of to reference the surface, to underline the surfaceness of a work rather than its illusionary depth. But I think what I just thought about when you said that is that in a way, modernist forms, that also dispense with that kind of neoclassical illusion of depth and grandeur, and basically present the buildings as themselves, as just the literal planar surfaces, and ask the viewer or the inhabitant to experience the building as a building and not as a kind of substitution for something else. And I think that the beauty of rear projection, and certainly that's something which we were interested in foregrounding in the film that you talked about, is in its flatness, is in the fact that what you actually see is a modern form. Even if it was invented for illusion, or if it was invented for economic exigencies, it was still nevertheless a modern form existing inside of a quintessentially classical, because film is really, sorry to go on, but when film was invented, in the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, it's really a kind of, how can I say, it's really a kind of a retrograde form, it's only interested in illusion, where all the other material forms are interested in the destruction of that illusion. So you actually have this film living on an island all by itself without any kind of relationship to what's actually happening in literature and in painting and photography. What you have is this very popular form which is developing a kind of counterinsurgency against the destruction of illusion. And yet, in the 1930s, or around the early 1930s, when the cinema had to find a way, I mean, more detail than necessary, but the reason why rear projection was used was more or less because with the introduction of synchronized sound in Hollywood films, it was impossible to record sync sound on location, because you had too much background noise. So the only way in which you could make sync sound recording of actors was to remove the background noise, and one of the easiest ways to do that was to bring the background into the studio, and then it was a silent background and didn't have all the crap of, you know, just everyday noise. So this was an economic and technical exigency in order to make it possible for the movies to be more real in their sound, yet nevertheless it introduced a flatness which was incredibly modern if we look at it now from our positions.
There's a conceptual shift that occurs with this idea of, you know, not pretending that illusion should not be seen as illusion somehow. So in a way it goes in the same direction as what you were describing before. In my mind, I mean, as you describe it, it's not meant to look like it's actual reality. It's already sort of gone beyond that point and sort of stages reality in a way that is decipherable by the viewer to a certain extent.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, you're right that it isn't, but it also is. I mean, at some level it's supposed to work. You know,
yeah.
We're supposed to believe that the people in the car actually are driving in the street, you know, and that the stock footage of New York behind them is really, that the car is really in New York, but we also know that it isn't because everybody's driving in this kind of very wooden, you know, just trying to follow the, excuse me, just following, the illusionary rhythm. And obviously by the 50s and 60s, blue screen was invented, and that became a slightly more efficient way to create that illusion. But you know, directors like Hitchcock continued to use rear projection right to the very end, and he clearly used it not because it was efficient, but because he, as you were hinting at there, that he actually loved the fakeness of it. It felt more filmic. It felt like, you know, and people criticized, you know, we forget now that when Psycho and The Birds came out, you know, they got terrible criticism, and one of the criticisms that those films got was that the use of rear projection. You know, people hated that. You know, it seemed too fake. You know, because by that time, the illusion was better, if you like. So I like it because
it was before reality TV.
It's before reality TV, but you know, already blue screen and green screen, and now, you know, digital matting. But you know. I like it because it has that, it's that idea of disavowal. I know it's not real, but nevertheless, I'm going to carry on thinking it's real, you know, and it allows you to hold that contradictory thought in your head, you know, that you're watching something that's real, but also you know that it's film. So I like that.